Hi, Norm. How you going?
Hello. Good. How are you?
Good. My name is Raz, and we are Classic Amateur. Thanks, everyone, for tuning in. We like to talk about classic stuff, and especially books. And this thing started during the pandemic. At a point in Sydney, you couldn't see your friends. You couldn't travel outside a 5K radius. And we decided to go online like everyone else and just have fun conversations, just stuff that we would normally discuss in our dining rooms, in our living lounge rooms.
The way you describe us sounds we are very smug, like we have a glass of wine on our sofa discussing classic books. I mean, I take it.
$3 wine, but still, yeah.
Sure.
Wine nonetheless.
We should have an episode where we talk about classic cocktails.
I think this idea of classic is amazing. I think you're right. It's a platform for anything that's good or acceptable or something that we want to endorse. So if it's cocktails or Captain Crunch or your favorite
it
cereal.
just happens that we start off with books, but that's just how Amazon started as well.
Just like Amazon, just like Bezos. That's right. Yeah.
And I'm already getting the hairline like Jeff Bezos had.
We just got to go bald in the next season. That'll really increase at least our friends' interest in watching us or family. Well, we had a good time, I think, at the time with Lolita, and because we're not shy of controversy, I thought we'd go with a good Holocaust book on this side. Just
before you jump in, I wouldn't describe it as we had a good time with Lolita. If I think that's a very unfortunate phrasing.
You're absolutely right, and I apologize. I take that back. We did not do anything with Lolita. It was the author.
Nothing at all.
We simply observed. Oops.
Oh, no.
Okay, I'll just move on to this one if that's okay.
Yes.
I wanted to share with you this book that I've been reading this week, and I don't normally do this. So normally the stuff that we've been talking about, because we're amateurs, stuff that I've read 10 years ago that I wanted to share with you. But this time I thought I'm just going to set myself a goal, and I'll read a book. What I did was I downloaded Audible and I listened to a book during my commutes, dishwashing, doing stuff around the house, and doing lawn mowing today, which is really unfair to the book, which is it's quite an amazing and sad book as well. Man's Search for Meaning. So I shouldn't be saying all that. But the truth is that I really tried to absorb this book and give it the respect it deserves. Don't think I've really done that. But nonetheless, I think that the book is still worth talking between you and me. And there's a few things
I think it's the best time to think about the Holocaust when you are cutting grass.
Yeah, the fact that you're expecting everyone to be exactly the same, that perfect grass, right? Like just like the Nazis expected their own country, followed the Aryan race. I think that's definitely a utopia and also very dictatorial from my side and just really authoritarian. This book is written by Viktor Frankl, a neurologist, a psychiatrist, and also an Auschwitz concentration camp prisoner and survivor. The interesting thing about reading the book or listening to the book on Audible, it was probably a 1995 recording, I believe, by a British guy. And it was a bit weird because, first of all, the British accent was something that made me really uncomfortable as I was trying to listen to this before going to bed. And it just made me really self-conscious listening to a British guy living in Australia. Just the accent, I couldn't really get into the zone. I felt, I shouldn't even say it felt a bit fake just because it was a different accent to the one that I was used to. And of course, my own, which is not very Australian.
So Viktor Frankl, was he like, where was he from originally?
Viktor Frankl was from Vienna. He was a doctor in Vienna.
So he was Austrian, technically.
Austrian, that's where Hitler comes from. So really the core.
They were neighbors.
Yeah, quite unfortunate place to be in the 40s in Europe as a Jew. Not great. But I was going to say, it made me kind of uncomfortable listening to this. I didn't really get into the zone, and I kind of found it really distracting. But the cringiest thing about listening to an audiobook, the first time I do that with any book that I comment here, is that it was really cringy when the British guy was doing kind of German accents whenever the inmates were talking.
Oh, holy shit. Is that what he was doing?
Yeah, and I would have been a lot more comfortable just keeping his British accent. But the narrator would switch into this kind of cliche German tone, which is probably acceptable in 1995. But currently, I don't think that's politically correct anymore. Not that I care about political correctness, but it got me out of the zone. Yeah, you know, when I was listening, and then all of a sudden, he's talking with that German accent and pretending to be a prisoner.
If I may add something, I'm fascinated by your choices of literature, because the other week we reviewed Snow White. You know, with its brutal background, it's still a fairly sweet, nice fairy tale, and now you want to talk about Holocaust. So nice little swing.
I just like to. I like things intense. I think it's worthwhile just picking and choosing the things that really trigger a form of emotion. And yeah, I think it was just a challenge for myself as well. It was a book that I was interested in reading for a real long time. I just feel like it was the right time, given what's happening in the world right now. A lot of, still conflict and suffering. And it was something that I had in my bucket list to read, a book about suffering and coping with the tragedy of human evil to some extent, right? And
Oh
loss.
wow!
And I just wanted to dissect it a bit and understand it a bit
Sure,
better.
let's jump into it.
I think instead of kind of the book is very simple. It's actually a very short book. So I think the guy wrote it in 45 after he came out of the camps, and he wrote it in like seven days or something. And it's really just a memoir of his experiences in the camp. And then because he's a psychiatrist, he took an approach to he's presenting his own kind of approach to psychotherapy that he distilled from his own personal experience by being there, and that he's been using that he proposed using and then he ended up using as a doctor when he got rehabilitated and started a practice as a
How
psychiatrist.
old was he when he got into the concentration camp?
Good question. I think he was in his 30s or
Okay,
mid 30s to late
he
30s.
was already a working professional, basically.
I think so. I think he was born in the 1910s or just about, and then this was in the 40s. So just maybe 35, maybe our age, if you think about it. And so he was definitely practicing. He was already a doctor at the time in Vienna, so established from a status perspective. And then, of course, I'm not going to go over all the details of the tragedy that he witnessed, and that's part of reading the book is going through this. But I wanted to linger on just a few things that I think would be worthwhile noting. And for instance, if you ask me, why read this book, what's interesting about it, I think these things kind of summarize it and also provide kind of the so what for me in terms of what I've learned from this book. Why is it interesting? And so of course he recounts everything that's happening, and I think he's been through like 4 different camps, and he recounts everything that's happening in each camp. How people get separated, the weakest get sent to the gas chamber straight away, and the other ones get to have these humiliating experience of being starved and exposed to menial work in kind of basically under psychological torture and from the SS guards without any clear kind of purpose of why this is happening. Mostly torment them for the and punish them for I guess being Jewish, which was the key problem of Nazi Germany internally.
Do you
Mm-hmm.
think? Do you think like there was like an underlying like feeling of sadism involved in this, or was this just generally the Nazis thinking of Jews as non-human? Like,
Mm.
I'm just because from my end, I cannot even hurt a fly, right? I mean, I can actually hurt a fly, but I cannot hurt a spider, for example. And it's weird. It's weird that someone could go up to another human being and do this horrible
Mm.
stuff to them. Like, what type of
Yeah.
mindset you have to be in? I don't know.
Yeah, I think there was some speculation in the book around that. And so the element of is it deterministic to some extent? The fact that the whole country was in the psychosis, anti Jewish propaganda, seeing them as kind of the root cause for their economic problems, and also, seeking this kind of cleansing. Was that driven kind of top down by the imagination of people like Hitler, or was it driven by individuals within and it's I guess a bit of both. So what was happening in the camps, you clearly had people guarding it, which were just they were assigned to do that. That was their job. They were in war.
Hmm.
They were being paid a job to look after prisoners, and there was a clear distinction between the people that were there to do just that and the clear sadists. The problem was that the clear sadists, in these circumstances, and I think we'll end up discussing Solzhenitsyn as well, the Gulag Archipelago, which is strikingly similar. It's always the sadists in these top-down authoritarian environments where there's no personal responsibility. You're just assigned to do something by your higher up. That the sadists just manifest themselves as and that's when they do the executions, they do the torture. They're waiting for that opportunity. The problem is that no one else says anything else. They just stand by us. This is just my job. I'm not paid, to do anything. I'm not paid to, and that's really the main problem of what's happening in these experiments.
If I may jump in here for a
Mm,
little anecdote, I was rewatching some of the Hannibal series, which somewhat related, somewhat not related. But there's an idea in the Hannibal series about being being an observant or being a participant, right? Like if you have a sadist friend, for example, or a sadist colleague, or like I don't think you want to be friends with a sadist, and you know how he thinks and reacts, and at one point you already know what he's going to do. When the first time this happens, and you're obviously oblivious of how he is or who he is, you're probably an observant, right? Because you're just observing what's going on.
mm.
But once you figure out his behavior and you can see the results of his action, as in like his sadist act, him torturing someone being projected in his behavior, are you still an observant, or are you a participant where you're just letting him do this, where you're enabling him to torture these people, although you could stand between them, right?
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's where you draw the line, is that if you can do something about it, you should. I actually wanted to
Yeah.
give you an example that I think sums up the book, which is an anecdote from the book, kind of close to the end of part one, when he is recounting all these tragedies. Like, I'm not going to go through, as I said, all the shit that's happening, because it's just absolutely horrible. But and it's something that is worth reading, but not necessarily worth recounting here in detail. But would like to say though that, so you do see the different type of people there, even within the camp itself. You've got the guards, but you also have kind of the leaders, self-elected leaders from within the Jewish group, that are actually sometimes worse than the guards. And they take this opportunity to kind of manifest their sadism and their kind of self-loathing, and they're actually more torturous towards their fellow community than the actual guards. So that, just to say that it does pick out the worst in people having these situations. But it wasn't kind of always. I think this is the moral landscape for really what happens next, because it his point is really that this sort of extreme situation of extreme suffering really brings out the extreme character of people. And what you would expect to be a very deterministic environment is that, starvation, executions, you kind of illness, disgusting conditions, feel you'd expect everyone to kind of just go at each other's throats and kind of kill each other for every loaf of bread. But that's not exactly what happens. There's a strong sense of kind of communion and solidarity between people to a large extent. And there's an example about a one day kind of a semi-starved prisoner steals some potatoes, and the guards, of course, want to know who it was exactly, and they know that someone knows, and they're put. This is very simple. No one gets executed or anything, but they do. They're all starving by now because they've been there for 5 years, right, or 4 years from the
Mm.
very beginning. So they're kind of subhuman. They're semi-human. They're just kind of skin and bone. They're all starving. They're just delirious.
Well, they
They've
are
had,
human, but they feel like
yeah,
they are
they're just skin
reaching
and bone,
towards
right?
their,
Yeah.
yeah,
And
their inner savage, I guess.
so the blackmail from the guards is, if you don't spit out who it was, you're gonna get no, you won't get any food in the next 24 hours. So just a small punishment, because these thefts and problems happened a lot anyway. So it's just to say, tease them a little bit against each other. And surprisingly, like in that situation, no one out of 2,000 people in the camp, 2,500, no one actually, everyone lies about it. And after that, in the evening, they cut all the lights, so they keep them in the dark, just to wallow on it. And there's this speech actually that he's asked to deliver to people. I don't know exactly why him. I guess he had built a good reputation within that group. And yeah, so basically the whole camp, 2,500 people, decided, well, we're not gonna denounce, we're not gonna rat on the who it was. So instead, the guards decided to deny them food for the next 24 hours. So they were put on no food, and they turned off the light, complete darkness, and kept them in the dark for 24 hours. And what happened was that people kind of started chatting and trying to discuss the situation they were in, and he was actually invited to hold a speech. And I think this is kind of summing up the essence of his book and what made it so important, from as a testimony, but as well as an enduring classic that everyone should read. Beyond the fact that it's a biography of someone that suffered in a concentration camp, the relevance for today is really around hope, right? It delivers hope, and I think that's kind of his speech was around hope. So, given the situation that they're all in, where they're seeing people every day dying from sickness, typhoid fever, also suicide. Like a lot of people would just not wake up, just decide to stay in bed. And what was happening actually was that people would just give up. And the way they would give up was cigarettes were very much a luxury. No one would actually smoke cigarettes, but they would somehow get into contact with cigarettes, and they would be just like maybe in some prisons today. There'd be a currency for food or other things, services. So they would hold on to the cigarettes and pocket them. And whenever they were starving or they wanted to help someone else, they would trade a cigarette to a guard or something and get a piece of bread. And what would happen to a person that lost all hope, say, the way this happened was they'd set a goal that, no, I'm sure the Allies will win the war, and by March next year, we will be rescued. And March would come, and that person would not update their goals. So one day they would kind of stay in bed, pull out the cigarette, and started smoking the cigarette. And what everybody realized straight away, and then 24 hours, 48 hours, that person is gone. That person will lie in its own excrement. He would be kicked or hit by the guards, no move, not willing to work or do anything, and just simply collapse. So the question in the speech was simply, you know, why hope? What's the point of hoping? And I think it is very relevant to all of us, right? It's been helpful through the pandemic, and it's helpful now when you look at the state of the world or even our individual circumstances. You and me here having a conversation, why are we doing all this stuff? And I think he's kind of breaking down into kind of 4 points. The first one that he was making to his fellow prisoners was, what have you really lost out of all this, like physically? I mean, so of course some people had lost family and so on, but he was making the point that your health, your family, even you can rebuild it. Your health you can rebuild, even your happiness or your professional status you can bring back, once it's tarnished. Your fortune or position in society, these are not things that are completely out of regress. Once you get out of here, you can actually have a chance at any point in your life, but especially then when the war was over, you can have a chance at building all that. And yeah, he was making the cliche point of Nietzsche that what doesn't kill you makes you stronger through the experiences that you've endured, because you're simply stronger through that.
Do you feel there is like underlying religious prospect of this? It sounds like a lot of the hope is quasi religious, or it feels like, hope for something that you have no reason to believe it will happen.
Yeah, it's kind of a nuanced thing. I don't. It's not necessarily like for like. This is inciting to hope equals religion, but there's an element of spirituality in having hope, which I think is deeply human and also biological. I think we've spoken in the past of the importance of having kind of that dopamine circuit activated. We need to be driven by a certain sense of objective. And I'll get to that in a second. What sort of objectives are meaningful? Because the whole point of the title of the book is Man's Search for Meaning. So what does he mean by meaning? But let me put that aside for a moment, and I'll just go through the speech, and then I'll go into what he thinks is meaningful and what does hope mean, and what's the relationship with maybe religion or not. His second point was around, this is the obviously things can be regained. The second one is think about the future, and then the fact that every day, we're kind of closer to death. I'm sorry that I'm so dramatic in this discussion, but it's a very kind of dark one. Every day we're actually closer to death, and then every day we have some chance of survival and some chance of not surviving. But as an individual, your chances of turning things around are enormous. So if you've thought about the determinism of things, actually as an individual, you have an amazing array of freedom of choice. And there's a saying that 1 hour can make a bigger difference than days or years, and we definitely see it. Like you get stuck 2 years in your house with the pandemic, and then maybe the next day you strike the new business or a new job or something, and it completely changes.
A new
Or
podcast.
new podcast, and it changes your life. And then yeah, that can actually make a huge difference. So always staying open to the fortune. Fortune favors kind of the people that are the brave, the people that are sticking out effectively for those life-changing moments. And then he was making this point. The third thing would be kind of the the past experiences, because who you are, being is comprised of having been, is his point. So everything that you've experienced, no one can take away from you. So if nothing is in front of you, you'll always have the stuff that's behind you. And, you know, everything, all kind of the people that you love, all your thoughts, relationships, even the suffering that you've been through, you know, that is actually what makes you a human being. So you have to kind of cherish it to some extent. Another point he's making in this speech kind of sums up the book is that life always has meaning, actually, and that includes suffering and dying. That's kind of intrinsic in itself. And the reason for continuing can sometimes be beyond that. Like, this is probably related to people that want to commit suicide. We should put some disclaimers somewhere. But, you know, the fact that there are actually expectations from other people, like your girlfriend, your wife, to live life with dignity, you know, and that's actually an important driver in life. They accepting your suffering is something that you just have to kind of do also for other people as well as yourself. And there's some meaning to sacrifice, you know, because at the end of the day, because we all die, we don't want to die for nothing. I have to do something that's worth it. It has an impact in the world. I think that's kind of summarizing what he was trying to say. It's kind of the meat of the book. And to your point,
so would you
now
recommend
about
the book? Who would you recommend the book to?
I think everyone, because it's an easy book
18
to
plus.
read. Yeah. No, even earlier, I would say. Maybe the moment you kind of self-conscious a little bit, especially as a teenager. I'd say, you know, when you're a teenager, I think you can already read this book. I wouldn't listen to it on Audible, but I would read it because I think
that was my follow-up question. Would you recommend the British version on it?
I wouldn't recommend No, I think some of the stuff, especially when it's very sad or, you know, kind of scary depictions of real life, I find it easier to read them in my own mind than to hear someone telling them to me. I just find them a bit more unsettling when someone tells me things where I see them. Imagine, you know, seeing gas chambers in a film is even more shattering than reading. So there's something about being able to pace your reading that makes it, you can actually appropriate the content and reflect on it in a deeper way, but at your own pace without being anxious about it. And I think anyone would kind of benefit from reading this book. And just to your point about kind of what is meaning, what does he mean by meaning? His whole point is about adopting kind of optimism, tragic optimism towards nihilism. So nihilism, nothing matters. We know we've spoken about nihilism before with Camus and so on, but with this one, it's like optimism. He means originally from the Latin optimum, like seeking the optimal point of things, which is in life is actually very immediate. So he puts it mostly on, again, responsibility. Because if you take on responsibility, which means just sorting out your shit that's right in front of you, or immediate, whatever's on your mind first, and take action, that actually creates a sense of meaning straight away. But the thing with meaning is that it's so individual. So it's not like what's the meaning of life, but it's like what does life ask of you in terms of meaning. So it's depends on the hour. Speaking the fortune, the coming every hour depends on the individual, and it's in a way, if you think about it, why is this individual so important? I think about my own experience sometimes. Of course, we're determined by who we are, where we come from, our cultural background, white males, whatever. But actually, what makes us a human is how we've transcended all that, our culture, and every single moment, and how we test the boundaries of that. And that's kind of what makes us individuals. And the way we do that is what's meaningful is like, well, just deeds. I know this is a very Christian thing. The deeds. What are your deeds? Show me the deeds. But like the work that we do, I'm not saying this podcast necessarily work, but we do some stuff that I find it meaningful. And then the second stuff is kind of like the experiences that we have, or meeting people, chatting to a friend, that's meaningful. And then this ultimately, this that I mentioned a bit, the dignity of your attitude towards suffering, the fact that suffering is everywhere, and you just kind of have to accept it is what makes it life meaning. Yeah, so I don't know. I've got two more anecdotes, and then we can wrap up. What do you think?
Sure.
What do you think?
I think I heard everything I needed to hear, unless you have some really cool, fun anecdotes, or really cool in this case, not so much fun.
No, they're
I'll
dark.
let you
They're dark,
decide.
two dark ones, if you want.
Up to you. Or do we want to spoil it? Do we want to spoil it for our
Oh, but
future
there's a lot
readers?
more. There's a lot more than this. This is just
Oh,
a
brilliant.
teaser.
Go ahead
No.
then.
So
Go ahead.
no, it's just Just to make the point about individuals, because the anecdote is about this Dr. J, who was kind of the head of the Vienna mental psychiatrist award back in the day, and he was conducting all these experiments on people and euthanasia and so on. So obviously horrible person, and he was just like passionate about it, right? He was passionate about it. And what happened was, after the war, I think he ended up captured by the Soviets or something, because they raided through Vienna. And I think the doctor met someone that had seen him in the famous Lubyanka prison, which was the, I guess, Secret Service prison in Moscow. And they shared some time there. And the person that had escaped the Soviets, and I was telling the story, was like, oh, that was one of the nicest people I've ever met. Basically, it was one of the most kindest people that had, offered a lot of himself. Really great, really grateful to. And it goes to show that, like, a person that is truly abominable in this. We don't know exactly what happened there, but did he turn around? But he clearly made a deep impact into other people's lives later down the road. And it's just so interesting how things can turn around, and the fact that sometimes we often think of a category of people as being evil, or but you look at one person, at an individual, and seeing their arc and their story. I'm not saying anything of that is excusable, but seeing that a person is capable of doing good as well as bad at the most fundamental level is something to always bear in mind about people. And yeah, I thought it was a very interesting anecdote that made me think a little bit about our own life decisions. The other one was more around, he's got this theory, and I didn't even touch upon it, the logotherapy, which is, what does it mean? Logotherapy is, I guess, logos comes from logos, and it's not just, doesn't just refer to talking, but it also, in this case, refers to the importance of purpose that I was touching upon at the beginning in people's lives related to spirituality. Spirituality fills a big role in that, but it doesn't necessarily need to be a belief in God. It can be any form of purpose that plays an important. A lot of people suffer, especially have and do now, from a lack of purpose, and this is translated into a lot of neurosis, depression. And just as an example, one of his patients that he had later in life, an elderly person, had lost his wife, and he was depressed. 70s, was the purpose of living, a lot of pain. And then what happened, I guess the question that he asked was, what happened, how would you feel if you would have gone and she was alive, would that have been kind of, how would she have felt? And then he's like, well, she would have suffered a lot because I wasn't there. And there you go. And his point was that, look, the suffering that you're taking on yourself right now is actually technically alleviating the suffering of your wife in a way. And she's probably, she went in peace knowing that she's loved, and that's okay, and just change in perspective, and always understanding things from a purpose driven. Why are you alive? I'm here to take suffering away from someone, even in the most horrible situations, can actually work and reignite that will to live and will to have meaning in your life. And I thought it was an amazing purpose, amazing insight as we, uh, approach life in general. Sorry, did I go too deep down the rabbit hole? That's all I had on
about 10 minutes ago. No, that's all right. That's all right. It definitely sounds like a very impactful book on you. And as you said, you recommend it as long as it's not the British version. I like British people, so I might listen to it in British just to spite you. But other than that, I think if that's everything you had to say about it, then we can wrap this up.
Yeah, that's cool.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for joining us. Read it. Support us using the links in the description or signing up for Classic Amateurs. Thank you so much for tuning in. I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
Thank you.